Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2026 Property Rights Luncheon. To start the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the CAAR antitrust statement. This statement ensures that we are encouraging discussions that promote all realtors and do not restrict competition among members or potential members. We work to foster a forum for an open discussion of diverse opinions without attempting in any way to discourage or sanction any business practice. The CAAR antitrust statement will be acknowledged before every CAAR meeting. You can see a full copy of our antitrust statement at the registration desk. Today, we have an excellent panel to discuss zoning and its impact on housing affordability. Before I turn it over to Neil and the panel, I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Julia Roberts of Fulton Mortgage. Is Julia here? I don't see Julia. Okay. Make sure you thank Julia next time you see her. Before we begin our discussion, I want to offer one more thank you. Today's lunch on the RPAC terrace was made possible by RPAC. You may have noticed the major investor bricks on the patio, a physical reminder RPAC donations matter. RPAC strengthens our government affairs work in Richmond and helps protect your businesses. Please support RPAC and thank them again. Let's thank them again for providing today's lunch. CAAR is fortunate to have a seasoned public affairs veteran working locally at the state level. In partnership with the 2026 Public Affairs Committee, he developed today's program and recruited the following professionals serving on our panel. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Free Enterprise Forum President and CAAR Government Affairs Director, Neil Williamson.
Seasoned. That's what they call you when you're old. There's that. Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Each year, the CAAR Public Affairs Committee, in their February meeting, develops the topic for this luncheon. We've had a wide variety of topics, and this year they've outdone themselves. Looking at how zoning impacts housing affordability and availability is something that we talk about every day. If you are a member of the 2026 Public Affairs Committee, please stand so we can recognize your work. Stand up. I'd also be remiss if I did not mention that the 2027 CAAR volunteer opportunity forms are now open. You too can help CAAR guide CAAR as we move into 2027 and beyond. Longtime CAAR members know that at this meeting we accept questions in what's called the National Press Club method, which is there are index cards in the center of your tables. If you have a question, write it down, bring it up here to our technical director, Austin Gunnels, and he'll get it to me and we'll get through as many questions as we can. Today's topics and panelist introductions. Today we're talking about discussing the impact of zoning on housing affordability and availability. I'm pleased to have three panelists, each of whom I've worked with somewhat extensively over the last 20 years. I'm going to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves and briefly explain how their work intersects with today's topic. First is my longtime friend, Elizabeth Hancock Greenfield.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you all for having me. This is a very exciting opportunity because I love to talk. As Neil said, I'm Elizabeth Hancock Greenfield. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Home Building Association of Richmond. And prior to that, I was the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Richmond Association of Realtors. So I was team realtor. In fact, sometimes I accidentally introduce myself as the Home Building Association of Realtors. I still can't, I call BuildPAC, RPAC. I mean, I'm just forever realtor at heart. So my role is the local advocate, lobbyist. I don't usually like to use that word for HBAR. And I represent our land developers, our builders, and all the different trades that support land development and home building. I work very closely with our local governments, not on our members' individual rezonings or special use permits, but more on broader policy on zoning amendments, comprehensive plans, anything that is going to shape or guide how land can be developed or homes can be built in the Richmond region. I'm also a fourth term planning commissioner in the city of Richmond. So I wear a planning commission hat as well, not as an HBAR representative, as a citizen appointee. So I kind of see things from both angles. So I think that's my intro.
That's great. Next up is another planning commissioner, and also a member of the CAAR and the CAAR Foundations are member of the Commonwealth Housing Coalition, Lyle Solia Yates.
There we go. Hello, Lyle Solly Yates, Charlottesville Planning Commission. I also teach zoning at the University of Virginia. It's my students are very patient with me on that. Zoning is not the most interesting topic for all audiences, but I think this group might appreciate it. I think this might be a good group to talk zoning. The new zoning in Charlottesville was a major lift for me. Also, the comprehensive plan, the affordable housing plan. I've been doing a lot of work with the Commonwealth Housing Coalition on statewide improvements. I'm especially proud of my fourth-story single-stair R2 residential building code amendment, which received unanimous support and will be incorporated into the statewide building code in 2027. I've also done some work with AARP on permitting more accessible homes statewide. Little progress on that, but we'll keep pushing. And taxes, very exciting. You might see some changes in the tax code in the city of Charlottesville in the next year or so. Hopefully a good thing.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least, please welcome my friend and Free Enterprise Forum Board of Directors member, William Park.
Thank you, Neil. First of all, I've known Neil for a long time, and as far as someone that promotes business here in Charlottesville and the surrounding areas, the Free Enterprise Forum is a really, really important group and does a lot of good work for all of us here. So I just want to give a plug to him because I need him to do some other things for me later on. So anyway, my name is William Park. I'm president of Pinnacle Construction Development Corporation here in Charlottesville. Also, a development company, Bluestone Land Management Company, Park Properties Management, and also Bluestone Capital Advisors. We originate multifamily loans for Virginia Housing Development Authority. So kind of turnkey developer, if you will, and primarily we focus on multifamily. Okay, the entire gamut, whether it be student housing all the way up to assisted living in Virginia throughout and in West Virginia also. Market rate housing is a big part of it, but affordable housing is a big part of what we do also. Significant experience dealing with low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, work in opportunity zones, and so forth. So at the end of the day, zoning is our lifeblood, whether we like it or not. Project's not zoned, we don't have a project, right? So we're very accustomed to rezonings, unfortunately, and they don't get easier, they get harder. And every locality is kind of the same, but every locality is a little bit different, right? I mean, whether it's units per acre, parking requirements, setbacks, height, whatever it is, everyone's a little different. So you really have to understand the ordinance and the comprehensive plan and the zoning rules before you get too deep into something. So anyway, look forward to the discussion here today.
Thank you. Our first question is going to go to Elizabeth, and you'll find my questions tend to have 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 questions in the one question, as to allow the panelists the opportunity to ignore those things they don't want to talk about. First up for Elizabeth. 1, urban development areas are intended to focus growth where localities can deliver services more efficiently. Many localities have used these policies for more than 30 years. Have they worked? How do these restrictions affect housing affordability? What percentage of a locality's land area should be designated for growth?
Well, that is a lot of questions, but good thing I have it written down in front of me. We actually have several of our localities that have urban development areas. And if you're not familiar with Central Virginia, we have obviously the city of Richmond, Chesterfield, and Henrico, which are very suburban, whatever you want to call it. And then we have our rural jurisdictions. Our rural jurisdictions, and we'll use Hanover County as an example, has an urban growth area. It's called the Suburban Service Area, where they have designated 30% of land in Hanover to be where they're going to focus growth. And I'm sorry,
30%.
30%. Yeah. And then the remaining 70% is going to be rural. The problem is people move to Hanover because they want to escape the city of Richmond or Northern Virginia or, Short Pump and Henrico. And they come to Hanover thinking they're going to get rural development, and they move into the suburban service area and they want nothing else. They want to close the door behind them. So they fight and they become the NIMBYs, and they say, you can't grow here. And our supervisors react to that. They're reacting to it right now by taking land out of the suburban service area and moving it into rural. And then what it forces our members to do from the land development side is they go into the rural area and build at 5-10 acres at a time because it's by right. And they can just skip the zoning process and all the headaches. So in theory, I think it does work to designate growth where growth is appropriate, where there's infrastructure, whether that be roads, water, sewer. But if you're not going to maximize it and you're just going to, unintentionally force it out into the rural areas, I think you're defeating the purpose. And that's often what we see in our more rural jurisdictions. I mean, what percentage should be designated? I think that's hard. For Hanover, I think 30% is too small. You've got 95 running right through it. I mean, it's got an industrial opportunity. It tends to connect, Central Virginia the Richmond region to the northern area. I think 30% is a little too low. Some of our more suburban, almost suburban areas, they don't necessarily have growth areas because they don't have as much rural land to protect. So now they're trying to kind of claw that back and protect the rural land, and they're doing it very aggressively, but they're not doing it with saying 30% here, 70%. So I don't know that I have an answer to what's the silver bullet for the percentage, but I know that if you're going to designate it, you need to use it, you need to maximize it. Otherwise, you're just going to end up in the rural area.
And for those that haven't heard my broken record, Albemarle County has less than 5% development area. And those lines were drawn during the Jimmy Carter administration. All right, next up, Lyle, you've spent much of the last 6 years working on what eventually became the Charlottesville Zoning Code. Many localities, including Charlottesville, are encouraging denser core communities, often resulting in more multifamily housing and townhomes. Is the market accepting this more prescriptive mix of housing types? What are the implications of eliminating exclusively single-family neighborhoods? And how have the neighbors responded?
Question. So I'm very interested in data. I suspect a lot of people in this room will agree with me on this. In doing the comprehensive plan and the zoning outreach, we pulled as much data as we could. We tried to figure out, okay, who are we reaching? Who are we not reaching? Most people we were not reaching. Not a surprise. It's very easy to speak to a small number of people. Hello. It's very hard to get everybody. That's real work. Most people don't necessarily want to talk to you about land use regulations. Most people want to talk about other things, which is understandable. So what we went to a great deal of effort to do was to understand who is talking to us, who is not. We heard a lot from people who have homes, and people who have homes generally are pretty happy with them. Are leery of change. Don't see a great need for change, because for them personally, it's not a problem. People they know, sure. Family members, sure. Coworkers, sure. But they're okay, which is, I mean, speaking as someone with a home, I can relate to this. For people who do not have homes, for people who are perhaps new to town, for people who are difficult renting situations, it's a very different story. They are not just hungry for change; they need it, and it's a question of when, how. I want it right now, please, please. There's real urgency. So it's helpful to distinguish between who is speaking to you and where they are coming from. They are very different stories. And both are important for government to listen to and to think about. But it's very easy, and this is something I suffer from also, is it just for it to become noise, just people shouting yes, no, yes, no. It's important to understand the why, and then get to the how, the when. Can we do it legally? These are good questions. There's a sort of ethic in zoning wonkery that talks about gradual change, gentle density. The idea that any change that should come should be relatively small, incremental, relatively unnoticeable, but meaningful. Think about changes in the backyard. Think about changes to height, yes, but relatively small. And that is as much as possible we tried to do. And that was popular. But it is still change. And for people who want absolutely zero change, it is no better. It is still change. The one thing we tried to do to help was to add a number of new aesthetic restrictions, tree plantings, sidewalks, additional setbacks, transitions between relatively dissimilar areas like business and homes that we didn't have in the previous zoning, to make things better, to provide a better aesthetic experience for the people living here, doing business here, living in Charlottesville. And I think it helps. It is more work. It is more money. It is more time. Some of it wasn't entirely legal. We're still working on that, but we are working it through.
Zoning wonkery?
Can I just chime in real quick?
Sure.
The consultants that were in Charlottesville are now the consultants within the city of Richmond. And I'm chairing the Zoning Advisory Council. And those consultants and our staff came out big and bold in the first draft to eliminate single family zoning. Wow. Let's just say we are, holding too close. We are in major campaign mode. We have two campaigns to try to put the zoning on the ballot for a referendum. I mean, it is just eliminating single family zoning has almost sunk the entire project. Sorry, just a little stop.
Well, and that is also a term. First, I want to say zoning wonkery. I like that one. But the idea of eliminating single family zoning isn't what it does. It eliminates exclusively single family zoning, because people hear that and they think my house is going to be outlawed. And that's not the case. The next question is to William. Your business operates, as you mentioned, in many localities across the Commonwealth. Recognizing as that all politics are local, do you believe one political party or a specific locality has a stronger approach to zoning and affordability? And the second question, which I know you're intimately aware of, when a project requires a rezoning, how does that affect the time and the affordability compared with you being handed a fully entitled project?
So first question, is there any locality that I like their zoning? No. Um, so, but they're all different, but they're all the same, right? For example, I had someone in the office before I left pull various places just kind of nearby where we've done rezoning. Okay. So and I'm going to read from what I see here. So Albemarle County, R15 is the highest classification for what we do as multifamily, right? But then you've got neighborhood model district, you got planned residential, you've got PUD, whatever you want to call it, up to about 34 dwelling units per acre. Okay, so the first thing we do as a developer, if it's not zoned the way we want it, then we go to the comp plan, right? And if the comp plan says it needs to be high density up to 34 units, then that's a signal to us that, okay, this may work. Okay. And then from there, we look at the site itself. Does it have the infrastructure? Does it have the utilities? Is it a sloping site? Technically, can we, if we want to build this, can we get that many units per acre? Many times the answer is no. And why is that? Because, well, we can't, the height restrictions may get us, or parking requirements are an issue. A lot of times we're in an area where it mandates parking, but we don't need that much parking. Okay, so those are all items that we have to deal with. I looked at, let's see, a couple other areas that we looked at zoning. Montgomery County project we did up in Montgomery County, the highest density they had was 12 units per acre and maximum 35 feet. So what does that tell you? You got to use up a lot of land. It's crazy, right? And they wonder why they don't have enough housing. And in a place like Montgomery County, infrastructure is limited because it all ties in with the town of Blacksburg. So it makes it very difficult to build in. Augusta County. And this is interesting in that the the number of units is based on the number of stories the building has. A one-story building has 8 dwelling units, a two-story 12, three-story 16, a four-story building 20 units per acre, and you can't go over 75 feet. But what does the number of stories have to do with how many units? So this, and I could go on, and it's probably more than you wanted to hear, but every locality is different, and some of these things go back 40 years where the zoning was in place, and maybe that made sense at the time, but it makes absolutely no sense now. So I will say my experience has been in the larger localities. I'll take another one that's had a lot of growth lately that we've built 2 projects in, the city of Winchester. Now, what Winchester did, they had a number of bonus density things that you could do to get you up to a reasonable level. So what have they done? They've incentivized you in certain areas to do certain projects based on the bonus density that you can do. Okay, that makes sense. And we as developers, we're going to go to those areas where they've incentivized us to have a higher density. To your point, it needs to be a higher density to make the project work. So again, there's no locality that I can point to and go, boy, I really like their zoning, but everyone is different. And it's amazing how many localities the zoning has been the same forever, because I don't think anyone has really challenged them, or maybe they don't want to grow, right? But that's what we've run into. And the last part of your question was,
Project requires rezoning. How does that compare to a project that's fully?
well, yeah, that's a no-brainer. I mean, when you add a zoning to it, all right, we're talking easy a year up to 3 years to get it rezoned, depending on where you are. On top of that, the cost that you incur trying to get this rezoning, with the knowledge that you may not get the rezoning, right? I have been in meetings with a board of supervisors the day before a meeting where I knew this person was the swing vote, and they looked me right in the eye and said, it's a good project. I'm going to support it. And I get it there that night, and I can always tell how this thing is going to go, because when they start off and they go, this is a really good project, you go, uh-oh. However, right? Now when they start off going, man, this project's terrible and I don't like it, and I hear what you're saying, Mary Sue, and all this, but I think, it's in the comp plan. But when they start off saying, I've got a great project, I know I'm going down, and that's exactly what happened to me. So the point being, what it takes to go through a rezoning now, it used to be, okay, it's going to be multifamily. We need to show a picture of other projects we've built. And from there on, we go, okay, it should be administrative from this point on. That's why you have a staff. That's why you have an ordinance. You have site plan rules and regulations that you go through. Anymore, you have to almost entirely design the project, hook it up to the utilities and everything before you can even get to that point after multiple times of revisions. And that just costs more and more. And the whole time you're doing this, interest rates have gone up. Maybe they've gone down. Rarely have they gone down. Construction costs go up and down. So I tell everybody, where I sit, I'm in charge, but I'm not in control. And that is a crappy place to be a lot of times, right? So long-winded way of saying it makes it very difficult. And that's why a piece of property is worth a lot more, as all you brokers and realtors out there, if it's already zoned and entitled, right? I mean, it goes without saying.
And those costs, of course, end up to the end user in general, because the project has to pencil out on its own for financing purposes, as well as your business's operations.
Neil, let me just give one example when I'm talking. This is a recent project we just had. We had a 220 unit project we've been working on for, I think, 4 years. And we're getting to where we've got everything done. We're getting to the closing table this past February. We get the project closed, and then 2 weeks later, they start lobbing bombs over in Iran. Now, what happens to the 10-year Treasury? All of a sudden now, in a matter of 30 days, 10-year Treasury's gone up 50 basis points. And on a $50 million loan, all of a sudden that deal doesn't work. So we just got lucky. We just got lucky. We closed that project just before everything went to hell, basically. And or not, if it hadn't, it had all gone by the wayside. So time kills deals, right? Time kills deals. And so I can't stress it enough, but so many times people just don't understand that have the power to make the decision.
That's very helpful. To the extent about zoning codes, there's a meeting on Wednesday, open house in Nelson County, regarding their zoning code. The last time their zoning code was updated, Elvis was alive. Literally 1977. Our next question goes to Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth, one of the joys of working in the great city of Richmond is that a bunch of people from all over the state come every January with these big ideas. Local leaders, which you deal with, often argue that zoning should remain under local control without state legislative interference. With Virginia currently short roughly 300,000 homes, due in part to restrictive local zoning rules, do you believe state legislators are willing to push back on localities and their associated lobbying groups, including the Virginia Association of Counties and the Virginia Municipal League?
I think we saw this past General Assembly session that there are some legislators that are willing to push back. Senator Schuyler Van Valkenburg is a great example. But when the rubber hit the road and it was time for that final vote on some legislation that would have made some policies by right, you saw legislators fold. And I think next year is going to be even more difficult for those legislators to be bold because they're going to be up for election. And they know that they can't take something home that their citizens don't like. And the representatives of VML and VACO, the local government organizations, they're their citizens, they're their representatives, they're voters. So I think that there's been a lot of talk at the state level, more than we have seen in the past couple of years, at least in my time. My first General Assembly session was 2002. And it's only been the last couple of years that I've actually started to see legislators not just talk about reining in local zoning, but making more, policies by right. They're actually starting to put in bills. I think that some of it is a little bit it's more talk. I also don't think it's the best idea for the state to step in. As much as I would love to rein in some of the local government authority, I think back to the Home Builders Association before my time there, when they went to the General Assembly to seek reform to the cash proffer laws. And in theory, the bill was great. We were trying to rein in a policy that had become, very expensive, out of control. But Virginia is not one size fits all. What works for Arlington doesn't work in Botetourt, doesn't work in Williamsburg. So the state coming in with one big, change ended up not working. And a couple years later, they had to go back and amend the bill. So I think we need some more guardrails on zoning at the local level. I also think it would help maybe give some of those supervisors a little political cover to the NIMBYs to say, I have to approve this case. The state legislature told me to. But I don't know that just completely eliminating locality zoning authority is the right way to go.
Yeah, I think that I feel as though at the last Pancakes and Politics last December, there was a sense from our local legislators that there's a little bit of a appetite for pushing back because, well, localities have had all this control for so long and look what they've done. And so I think more to Lyle's point of smaller incremental changes are probably politically viable in non-election years, more so than in election years. Lyle, your experience with municipal code is well known. Inclusionary zoning requires a percentage of new housing units to be affordable, either for rent or purchase, at a set percentage of area median income and for a defined period of time. Based on your experience in Charlottesville or elsewhere, Do you believe inclusionary zoning policies help or hinder the creation of affordable housing?
I've spent a lot of my time on this question. I like to distinguish between funded inclusionary zoning and unfunded inclusionary zoning. Charlottesville set on a path of unfunded inclusionary zoning, saying, well, the developer will solve this problem for us. How wonderful. Developers, though, having many virtues, cannot solve every problem. What many builders have told us in the city is that they are not affordable housing providers. They don't have that capacity on hand, especially the smaller ones. They would have to hire someone to administer that kind of program, and they're not going to. That's just not what they do, and that's not what they're going to do. A handful of larger builders can do it one way or another. So generally, what they do is pay. They pay the money. I'm not against money. Money can be very helpful in solving big problems, and we are spending a lot of money in the city of Charlottesville on affordable housing. We've committed to spend $10 million every year, and I think we've beat that every year for many years now. So it does add up, it does help. But when you are taxing housing development to help affordable housing, there is some conflict in that kind of approach. What they're doing in Portland, which I find very interesting, is they're using tax dollars to match, to make the numbers work. Baltimore is doing the same thing, where they look at the difference between providing affordable housing versus market rate, and the government is stepping in and putting in the difference so that it does not harm the economics of the initial development, and it can make the whole thing work. It's more expensive. One way to do it, the Baltimore method, is through targeted tax breaks. We've been talking about this in Charlottesville for at least 10 years now. I'm pretty sure it's legal. We are looking at this, but everything takes so much time.
So does it help or hinder?
I am unimpressed with unfunded inclusionary zoning in Charlottesville up to this point.
William, I think you may have thoughts on this topic.
Well, I agree. If it's unfunded, it becomes exclusionary zoning, right? I mean, because, and you mentioned Portland or whoever putting tax dollars in where you're taking someone else's money and putting in there, right? And it may be a lot of people that isn't where they want their money to go at the end of the day. So I think it goes back to incentives. If the locality wants to provide an incentive in order to make up the difference, then it's something to look at, right? But you've got to be real careful where that money is coming from regarding that incentive. Our experience has been probably the best way to do that is with some form of real estate tax abatement, right? And if you're still going to tax that property at what it was always taxed at, but you're not going to tax the improvements, then you really haven't given up anyone else's money, right? And you might have created that incentive there that will do the inclusionary zoning, but it might not be at 60%. It might have to be at 70 or 80. And that's why, to your point earlier, every place is different, right? And a 20 unit size project is going to work a lot differently than a 200 unit size project. And that's why when you're looking at this, it's very difficult to make it prescriptive versus descriptive because it's very hard to make one size fit all in our experience. And unfortunately, too many times when the inclusionary zoning has been, when it's been promulgated, what happens, they really haven't sat down with the practitioners to go, well, does it work? Right? And if it doesn't work, then people aren't going to develop in your locality. They're going to go somewhere else. So now it's made it even worse. Okay. So I'm not, it just can't be an unfunded inclusionary zoning, to your point, from what I've seen. So.
Elizabeth, the next question is to you, and it focuses on another prescriptive part of the zoning code. Charlottesville recently eliminated parking minimums to reduce fossil fuel use, lower land consumption, promote walkability. Virginia has also recently passed parking reform legislation. If local governments no longer have parking minimums, will the market still provide enough parking for residents?
I'm going to say yes. City of Richmond has eliminated parking minimums. It's been in place for about maybe 2.5 years. And because I would say 90% of the projects in the city of Richmond are by SUP, because the zoning ordinance is so stale and old, and half our buildings, I think 70% are non-conforming. So pretty much everything has to be done through a special use permit, which is similar to a rezoning process. When the elected officials get their hands on the case, they're pretty much saying, I know we don't have parking minimums, but you're going to put it in if you want my support. Also, and I'm sure William could speak to this in more detail, from what I hear from our developers is, the bank's not going to lend to me if I don't have adequate parking, and can demonstrate that I'm providing adequate parking for my project. So I think there's still, even though it's technically in the city of Richmond eliminated, and we've seen the state put in some reforms, I think there's still some back end negotiations that are going to still require certain levels of parking. So I would, at least in the Richmond region, I'm not ready to say it's completely eliminated.
Do you want to chime in, William?
So the good developers will provide enough parking. The ones that don't know what they're doing will not provide enough parking, right? I mean, that's the way it works. But I will say, to your point, you're right. I mean, when the deal's being underwritten, you're going to have a market study. The banker's going to look at it and they're going to go, well, wait a minute, where's everybody going to park? And you've got to look at it from a competitive standpoint too. If the one down the street has parking, and it depends on where you're located. If you're in the middle of the city and you're on bus routes and so forth, it's a lot different than being out, say, in Crozet, where someone's going to have to drive to get to work. So, again, I think the good developers are going to do it. I think taking away the parking minimum is a good thing because we've run into situations. The old school was every time you pulled out the zoning manual locality, it said 2 parking spaces per unit. Okay, so I'm doing a 1-bedroom affordable senior project, and now I've got to do plus 10% for visitors, right? You got to have that also. Yet I could build a 4-bedroom student project and still only have 2 parking spaces. So you're right. It just doesn't make any sense. So the market study, the location, a good developer, they should be able to figure out the parking that's required.
Great. Lyle, I'm going to ask you a question that is somewhat market-based, but I really want an academic answer. And this is a question from the audience. What's with all these apartments being built in Seville and not affordable housing or a condo to own?
So I've asked that question too. The best understanding that I have, and I'm not an economist, I must warn you, sorry if you were hoping for that. But what I've been told is that large student housing developers have access to pots of money that you or I'm sorry to say, do not have. Student housing near a university is a pretty good bet. Probably there will be a need for student housing near the university. Maybe not in Crozet, maybe not in Fluvanna, but probably next to the university. As a result, they can unlock vast amounts of money. Even, good economy, bad economy, high costs, low costs, they are still going to proceed. So that is what we are getting. And that is what we can extract inclusionary zoning funds out of. That's what can get through the system. They just have the resources to put that together at a large scale. The lovely missing middle things, the more smaller pedestrian scale things that we talk about in the comprehensive plan and in the zoning, do not have access to those kinds of funds. So we are not seeing them, at least not at this time.
William, next question is for you, again from the audience. Why does it seem to cost more for development and construction here than in other localities?
That's the case, right? I mean, land is a big difference, and the time to get a project approved is longer here. Other than that, construction costs are not a whole lot different here than they are anywhere else around the state where we work. In fact, I can make the case sometimes that if we get into an area, let's say we were building in Southwest Virginia, or even when we've built around Virginia Tech at Blacksburg, that is probably the hardest place we have in the state to build right now. Why? Because you have a huge university there and small town around. So where do most of the people work? They work at the university. It's hard to find workers on the construction side and even on the property management side. We struggle up there finding. So a lot of it depends on the locality, but I would push back a little bit on just pure construction costs are not necessarily more here for apartments what we do, right? Because we may have a framing sub that works with us all the time that's based in Charlotte. Okay, so it's whereas home building may be a little different. That's not what we do, but the scale we're on, when I call up Ferguson and I need 200 refrigerators, 200 dishwashers, and so forth, you can drive the price down, irrespective of whether you're here or Winchester or down in Hampton Roads. So I would say here the major difference, obviously, is land. We talked about earlier, there's not but so much land that's in the development area trying to get it rezoned. That's where the cost big difference is.
Thank you. Elizabeth, as the state and or localities look at eliminating exclusive single-family zoning, remembering you're not an attorney, how does that impact existing deed restrictions and HOAs?
Because I'm not an attorney, I don't have the answer for that. And I don't want to mislead anyone. It's my understanding that the deed restrictions and HOAs trump the zoning, but it looks like this gentleman has the right answer.
Lyle, friend.
I'm sorry to say that I bother my friends at the law school about this every year in my lecture there. So yes, contract law still exists regardless of what we humble localities try to do. The contracts still win. At this time, even very old, explicitly racially discriminatory covenants still have the force of law in perpetuity in Virginia, which I have some feelings about. I've written a paper about that. I think probably we should see reform on that. The NAACP has spoken out about that several times. I am hopeful we'll see changes on that in coming years, but there is a certain delicacy because contract law is the law for a reason.
And I've heard other states have gone into working to get in between that HOA and member and homeowner, and they've been somewhat successful with, especially our next question involves accessory dwelling units. And the HOAs had fought in other states to maintain their HOA regs, carried the day over the code of the state, and the state won. Now, I don't have those cases in front of me, but it is something that I'm interested in because as I've learned in recent years, if you want to do a development of 5 or 6 homes, once you get to that level, the locality will make you have an HOA, whether you want one or not. Generally speaking, for a variety of reasons, because it frees up a little bit of the locality's work. Lyle, this one goes to you. Can you explain ADU zoning? As is it, as they say, rather, okay in all of Virginia?
Talking about accessory dwelling unit zoning and not affordable dwelling unit zoning, because
Yes.
Virginia law defines both using the same acronym because they want to make us crazy.
Yes.
Accessory, wonderful. I haven't studied the code. We did get some accessory dwelling unit legislation in the last session, but I don't remember the details. Elizabeth, you're nodding.
We did, beginning in July 1, 2027, accessory dwelling units will be by right in residential areas, but there are some restrictions, and that's what I don't have memorized. So there are restrictions in terms of size and, how much footprint they cover on the lot. So it's not going to be that you can just go and pop up a granny flat in your backyard. You're going to have some parameters within the state code. But I will tell you, even with the state code allowances, while that's not in place yet, the city of Richmond also made accessory dwelling units by right around the same time they eliminated parking restrictions. And even with that by right authority, we're still finding loopholes because now fire will come in and say, well, you might be allowed to have that ADU by right, but you're not within 250 feet of a fire hydrant, so we're not going to approve you. So, I'm just saying, beware, don't get too excited just because the state has stepped in and put some guardrails around. I can see localities finding sneaky ways to get around it.
And the state code mandates that the restrictions on ADUs cannot exceed the restrictions on the primary residence with regard to setbacks and land mass, et cetera. I am encouraged by some of the things the state has done, but I'm also not convinced that it's going to make the difference, because fire and others can step in and suggest that that won't happen, as well as HOA covenants. Question first. I'm going to give it to you first, Elizabeth. What is the one local land use angle or regulation that you would like to see implemented or eliminated that you see as maximizing housing affordability?
Ooh, well, I mean, as William stated, one of the biggest drivers of cost is land, and I don't know how any one regulation could drastically change the cost of land. I mean, yes, if you're allowed to build denser and get more on your land, I think that can impact affordability. But from what I hear from our members, and this is something that William explained early, it's the time of going through and the entitlement process. We had one builder who identified land, got it under contract, went through entitlement, did all of the site plan, construction plans. Took him 9 years to build 100 homes. And the longest part of that time frame was the rezoning process. And it was because of the citizen pushback. And we're all citizens. We all want to say and what goes on and what happens in our communities. But from what I've seen, it's the vocal minority really driving the no. So if there's one thing that I could put in place, keeping in mind my earlier comment that the state coming in and changing zoning laws it's not a one size fits all, I would shorten that rezoning time frame to where, decisions would have to be made within a defined time period, or you move towards approval, because you can really, really drag that out. And that is a huge amount of cost. And William mentioned this earlier, but same with my builder example. Those 9 years, he just saw his interest rates tick up, tick up, tick up. He saw the price of materials go up. That price point that he started at is nowhere near what he's going to sell those homes for, and largely because of the rezoning process. So I know that that's not going to be the silver bullet to housing affordability, but I think it could take a lot of uncertainty and time and added expense out of the process. And I think that would make a difference long term.
That'd be great. Next one's for Lyle. If we rezone for affordability, should the traffic study come before the density or after the units are already entitled?
This reminds me of a lawsuit I remember.
Why
Very
does the
familiar.
traffic study come only after the aforementioned lawsuit?
Indeed. So there's differing ideas of what is a transportation study. There's a relatively recent law passed that forces collaboration with VDOT for rezoning. And the intention was, as I understand it, that the state and local should be working together. Especially where VDOT owns the right of way, there should be some understanding of what's happening on the parcels connected to that right of way, which I largely support. The city of Charlottesville controls its own roads. VDOT does not control the right of way in the city of Charlottesville. There was a lawsuit, and it was determined that we should work with VDOT on this issue. And we have done so. We've given them a great deal of money for it, and it's wonderful. And we actually have gotten some useful information from that, which I'm pleased to see. A lot of our transportation studies were based on sort of straight line predictions based on assumptions that are not true, have not been true. But it's sort of standard in the field to use these straight line predictions, regardless of their validity. Now we have some sense of what's actually happening, has happened, and has given us a more clear picture of what's happening. So good. Government is working. Fantastic. That has helped to inform a much larger transportation study that is just beginning, which will guide transportation investments in the city of Charlottesville and hopefully the region, TBD on that, for the next 30 years or so, and will cost millions of dollars. I'm very hopeful about that, but you'll hear more about that soon.
Yet another planner employment plan. Um, William, this next question is to you, and I'm combining two cards from the audience. It speaks a little bit to the market. And um, right now, rental apartments are not being fully absorbed by the population. This makes no sense if they sit vacant. Has the city or the county ever considered giving incentives to properties for rent so that they could be rented at an affordable rate, or for condo conversion?
Okay, so we've had one project where we've worked with the County of Albemarle where they did provide the incentive for the affordable housing. They provided we had tax exempt bonds induced, and then they provided real estate tax abatement for 15, I think it was 20 years in order for us to make the affordable housing work. So that is one where the incentive absolutely worked. They stepped up. They did what they should have done, and this was before there was a affordable housing program that they have now. And we worked with staff and got through it, and it's worked really well. As far as conversions, well, first of all, usually what happens when a market's been oversupplied, it just has to work its way through the system, right? I mean, and you know what's happening right now. All you have to do is ride by an apartment complex and you see the sign up now leasing or 1 month rent. To your point earlier, a lot of the big guys have come in town. They've discovered Charlottesville. They have capital that they have to place. If they don't place it, the investor wants the capital back. I mean, that's just the way it is. So it's a little bit of funny money in that they're building things that right now really don't pencil out. And what does that do to all of us that are trying to actually do a project that pencils out? It makes it difficult in the short run. So my feeling is if a locality tried to incentivize it, whatever apartments are empty, by the time they got everything approved and worked through it, the market would take care of itself, right? I mean, that's just the way it works. So I'm not sure unless there was a program right now in place that incentive was there to say, well, I'll tell you what, if you take these apartments, you've got 10 vacants. If you house people at 60%, we can provide you X. Someone might do it. But absent of that, I just think you just let the market do what it's going to do, and it's going to work itself through.
Thank you. Lyle, the idea of planning and rezoning, you've done a lot of study on where this came from. And there are some that believe that it's kind of based on a certain community size. And how does the history of zoning and master planning, which is now outlawed in Albemarle, fit into what we're doing today and the new zoning code?
Yeah, the history of zoning, at least in the United States, is very strange because it's very regional, it's very specific, and it's based on different desires at different times. It's oddly personal. Like there's a few people who really put their personalities into it in sort of a strange way that became sort of permanent in the way we do it that other countries don't. So when I tell other planners in other countries what we're doing, they look at me like I'm crazy. Just a I'm relatively normal by American standards, I swear. The give me more. I've gotten the start, I think.
So the idea that all of this thinking goes into this based on academics, in some cases, with like looking at communities of about 3,000 people,
Yes.
whereby we're at a different size now. Charlottesville's at a different size now. How does that impact your thinking about the implications of zoning code?
How I personally think about it?
Sure.
Okay. So in my class I talk about different ways you can think about zoning. You can think about zoning as sort of the legalistic. Well, this is defending from harms to my property. Think of pollution. Think of water coursing over a parking lot. Think about a tree falling down. That's very, very timely for me. The sort of defensive property, which is, I think, a relatively manageable way to think about it. And that sort of comes more from contract law. and then kind of bubbled into government regulations. There's another way about thinking, aesthetics, the city beautiful. How do we make it an enchanting place that attracts investment, that makes us happy, that, is sort of joyful to see, people want to paint pictures of, which is harder, more expensive, more confusing. How do we get a committee to agree on what is beautiful? Generally, it's more expensive. That's a good indicator, and slower. I try to reduce the amount of money and time we spend on that, but I'm not very successful because we're Charlottesville, we're special. Then there is sort of another way of thinking about it, which is more about certainty, clarity. What will the future hold? How can we know what will come? We can look at a property and look at the zoning and get a sense of what there might be. It's sort of the shape of possibility, and that changes relatively unusually. And there's a sort of some control, some oversight of how that works. That's certainty. Bankers like that. Bankers like when I talk about certainty. That comes at a cost, but there's a value to that as well. I think, if there is any value to zoning, and I think there's several, I think that's a big one, giving people some security in their investment, in their home, in their business, that things will be somewhat similar going forward. And I hope we keep that as we sort of think differently about zoning and regulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate each of your candor today. I've learned a lot. We could spend the rest of the day talking about well, we could just let Lyle talk the rest of the day. Sorry. But we'd only scratch the surface. I will say that working with you all in the various capacities has been always enlightening. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank again the Public Affairs Committee for bringing forward this idea, and for our sponsor, Fulton Mortgage, and RPAC. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you all.